Okay, hi and welcome. I'm Karen. I'm here with Kelly, and we're going to be answering a series of questions. And the first one I would actually like to ask Kelly, I hear this come up a lot. I think this is challenging, very confusing for people, and frankly, sometimes very scary. So the question is, how can you tell if you are clinically depressed when you
Yeah,
are grieving?
yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and it's something that I think gets asked multiple times a week to me. Somebody comes in, especially a new client, and they're like, "I think I'm depressed," and I go, "Okay, well," and I pull out a handout that I have, and it shows grief and depression, and I say, "Take a look at this and tell me what you think." And I would say 99% of the time, the client looks at it and goes, "Oh, it's grief."
Mm,
Right. And so the biggest difference, I think, with grief and depression is that grief is really focused on the loss. We have to look at what they're focusing on, what that individual is focusing on. And it's usually that the fact that this person is gone, they're out of their life, they've died, that they can't have this connection, this relationship with them like they used to. And depression is really more focused on yourself.
mm.
It's this overwhelming feeling of sadness that makes you not want to get out of bed, that may cause you to have suicidal thoughts, can feel just significant fatigue, even though you sleep a lot. And yes, those symptoms sound very similar to grief because we see that happen, right? We see the fatigue, we see not wanting to get out of bed, all of these things. But the biggest difference in my belief is what it's focused on. Are they focused more on themselves, that hopelessness for themselves, or are they more focused on that loss of connection?
Okay. That's a great answer. And I do think that helps clarify it in a lot of ways because it is so confusing. What about a situation where a person has experienced depression or has a history of depression and then is starting to feel like it feels very similar? Because as you said, it's so hard. If we're talking about spending time in bed, lack of interest, motivation, energy, isolating, there's so many things that cross over. And for a lot of people, they're like, this is familiar. So, in that situation, what does a person do if they've had depression before and are now grieving?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that they're obviously, if they have a pre-existing depression prior to a loss, that depression may be heightened. And we may see an increase in those symptoms because, again, it does look so similar to grief. So, obviously, making sure that you're using your support system, that you're using your coping skills, thinking about what's helped you in the past, and seeing if those tools help you now. If you feel that that depression is increasing, especially if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, making sure that you're seeking mental health treatment from a professional, a grief coach or a grief counselor, making sure that you're having some added support, that you're reaching out. If you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, using maybe your local mobile crisis, going to the ER, using some of the crisis lines, making sure that you're getting support to stay safe. I do think we need to make sure that we stress that because we want you to be okay. And
Yeah.
obviously, we are just giving some advice and answering some questions. We are not giving mental health, guidance and treatment in these videos.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and speaking of that idea of having like a suicidal thought, I know a lot of times people I work with will say something along the lines of like, if something happened to me tomorrow, I just wouldn't care, and they'll kind of describe it that it's not a suicidal thought, but it feels as close to one as they've ever had. And I know that can be
Mhm.
confusing for people. So I'm sure that's something that you've seen a decent amount as well. How do
Absolutely.
you handle that with people?
Well, and I also want to bring up, in addition to that, I also hear, well, I just want to be with them.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a difference between being suicidal and wanting to end your life and wanting to be with your loved one, or being okay with the fact if you don't wake up, you don't wake up, right? There's definitely a difference in that. And I mean, obviously, I think you should be talking to somebody about these thoughts regardless. But, if you are having thoughts about wanting to hurt yourself enough that you're going to die, you need to seek mental health treatment. But I do think there's a big difference. I think it's pretty common for somebody grieving to have thoughts that they want to be with their loved one. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're suicidal.
Yeah.
It's they miss that connection, they miss that relationship, and they're just longing for it.
Yeah.
And so, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on all of this?
Well, yeah, what I try to help people understand, again, once we've kind of ruled out everything else, and they say, listen, I wouldn't do that. I see what my family's going through. I wouldn't put them through this, then we kind of talk about the idea that, a lot of times people who are grieving find themselves in a life that they didn't want and didn't ask for. And so it's like kind of a rejection of an unfamiliar life and all of the pain that comes with it, but not life itself. And those are two like really different things. And if we really think about that, because I think sometimes, we kind of make that connection like, oh, if something happened to me, but it's like, no, this is just really more about wanting to find some place where pain could ease, but it's not about wanting to take a drastic measure. And usually when I talk to people about that, they're like, yes, that's what I want. I just want to be suffering less. And that's where I talk about, the continuation of care and support and all of the other things that we need to do to get there, you
Yeah,
know. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
absolutely. So, okay, well, this was a tough one, but I'm glad that we, were able to address some of it. I think this is one of the more common things that comes up. So hopefully that will be a help. Great answers there, Kelly. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So stay tuned for more questions and answers from us. Take care.